Hello, my name is Helmut Lanziner. I was the operations manager on the search for the galleon San Jose off the coast of Cartagena, Colombia.
Helmut, what year was it that you started in with the San Jose?
I think it was end of October.
You want to talk about your background a little bit?
There's lots of stories about that, yeah. I was spent many years not only learning about positioning and sonar and finding things, but also training crews in the work. So I was usually running search operations, particularly in the Arctic.
What were you doing for the offshore oil and gas drilling?
I would go to the Arctic in June, July, and there was the Beaufort Sea, and ships were operating there for 3 months, usually from July to September, October. Okay, we're doing lots of things, observing under the ice. We built a vehicle that could swim from one hole to another, and I operated that. The high Arctic was anywhere from maybe minus 30 or 35 to minus 55.
You're considered a pioneer of electronic charting in Canada.
Right. In fact, the Coast Guard, Canadian Coast Guard, asked me to join their delegation to IMO, the International Maritime Organization, where standards are set for any piece of equipment. And they were trying to set new standards. And I remember the Canadian Coast Guard said to me, "You know a lot more about this system than we do." So he said, "So would you join?" And I did. And for about 11 years, every year, I made many trips to London for the IMO, and Monaco was another, the International Hydrographic Organization, which is headed by the Prince, by the way. He came and usually met with us, and we were laying out standards for hydrographic charting. It was a very busy time. I made many trips during the year in between going to the Arctic. I remember going up and down the west coast and Vancouver, and airplanes and ships that sank and boom boats that sank and trucks that went off a barge and stuff like that. So I was doing a lot of search work with the Canadian Coast Guard. I was also spending a lot of time in finding and recovering blowout preventer stacks, although that's a large object, easy to find. I was also finding very small objects.
It sounds to me like you speak humbly about your background, but indeed it's actually quite impressive. So tell me how did you get involved in the San Jose project?
They knew, like John Horton, who was the guy that actually hired me. Okay, John Horton asked me a number of times to help train his crew. So while the submarine was being built and used for testing and so on in Vancouver, I a number of times was called in, and I would go out and drop something on an object on the seabed, and we'd go out and I would show them how to find that, how to detect it with the sonar and come up to it and so on. So that's so he knew that. And I think in the end, when I went to Mobile, Alabama, to try and have a discussion with him, he asked me to come down. I remember wondering, he had all the experts sitting there. I didn't hear from one single one that they had experience in running an operation like this. And I kept wondering as I'm talking, saying, who the hell is going to be in charge of that? I think it was at the end, Horton then said to me, "Hey, listen, we really wanted to ask you if you're interested." And my friend Willie, who was a partner actually with John Horton, "You're right out of your mind."
Tell us the story about the Picard.
This gives you an idea of the size and shape of the Auguste Picard submarine. There are 40 viewports, 20 on each side, for people sitting inside to look out, and 3 viewports at the bow, shown by the arrows. The inside, when the vessel was built, it was built as a tourist vessel, and it shows here the way it was built and released.
It's 92 feet long or 28 meters long. That's pretty long, and it'll dive to a depth of up to 2,460 feet or 750 meters.
That's right. That's a fantastic depth. I mean, fantastic depth. It's the largest non-military submarine in the world. is built in Switzerland for the 1964 World Fair, and it was used as a tourist vessel during the World Fair by taking a total of 22,000 people to the bottom of Lake Luzerne. And these people had to be taken in groups of 40. So there were many, many, many dives made during that period. The idea of building this submarine was to use it initially as a tourist vessel, and then after the World's Fair to convert it to a research vessel. It was later rebuilt and converted to a significant extent in Vancouver, Canada in the 1970s, and then later on moved to the Gulf of Mexico in 1980s. Before departure, a new drop weight had to be installed, which was done in Pascagoula, Mississippi, at a shipyard for Chicago Bridge and Iron. Here you can see the submarine out of the water being lifted by a 300-ton crane and set up on shore for the repair work. The layout of this drawing of Auguste Piccard shows the way the vessel was used on the search, which was different, quite different from the way it was built to start with. There were extra batteries, which is shown on this slide at the bottom forward. Emergency drop weight is shown in the middle, and a sub-bottom profiler, a deep sub-bottom profiler to look below the surface of the bottom for anything that may be buried there. And at the back, again underneath, is the side scan sonar, which was used primarily for most of the search conducted.
Tell us about the side scan sonar.
Yeah, side scan sonar is a fantastic tool. It's technically, you have to understand what it does, but it was fairly new. It wasn't invented, I should say, until about the late 60s. I was probably the only guy in Canada that had side scan sonar.
The tools you had when you were searching for the San Jose in the submarine was side scan sonar?
Exactly, yes.
Can you tell, like, in the picture, the sonar picture that is in your slide deck, can you describe what we're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, what we're looking at there right now is basically what's called the acoustic shadow. You see, actually, somebody wrote on the record. I never write on the record.
In this area here that, to the layman eye, looks like a white blob with darkness around it. What can you describe what that is?
Well, on the bottom, like on the edge closest to us, that's the one. Yeah, that's the actual ship. There's a little bit more behind it, a little deeper of some darkness. Well, not that far, but when you right underneath there, just see a little more. But that's the actual ship. The rest of it, the white part, the really light part, is the acoustic shadow, because the sound from the sonar couldn't see through the wreck. So it projects a shadow, just as if you had light. Same with the light, but this is acoustic rather than light. And it shows the shadow. And again, when we saw the shadow, and we saw this image, and I checked it right away for length and physical size, and it matched very closely to what we had, 140 feet. So
you estimate this from this end, one end here, to the other end to be roughly 140 feet?
Right.
And can you explain what these little black specks are up here, these little tiny, all this?
We actually saw them visually. They were staghorn coral, but we saw the staghorn coral. We saw lots of it.
And then can you talk a little bit about what this chart is, like all the different lines back and forth? And
yes, this was basically a track plot used for guiding the submarine on the search pattern that I laid out every day. We took that same piece of paper and put it on the plotter, so they could not just with graphics on a screen follow it, but also on the plotter could see whether they're on the line or off the line.
And then what is this chart?
This is the magnetometer chart that was used to see if there's any large amount of iron ore on the wreck we saw. And you can see there's a big spike right on top when the submarine crossed over the top of the wreck. Lots of iron ore. They figured it could be the cannonballs, it could be the cannons, it could be if they were iron.
I'd like you to talk about this slide, if you would, in the interior of the Piccard, and how you looked out and how many hours you spent looking out the porthole here?
There were two ways of operating with Picard. We had the one way where we were side scanning, where we were 15 to 20 meters off the bottom. We needed to be that far off to reach far enough with a sonar looking out the side. After we finished collecting sonar records, we wanted to do visual observations. And for that, we wanted to be very close, like 2-3 meters off the bottom. So I can look out the viewport forward, which is indicated by the red arrow there. We had good lights and cameras on the bow of Picard, which allowed us to see a fair distance. And so I was on my knees most of the time. So I could get my eyes close to the viewport, so I had maximum lateral vision. When we went back in May, I was so impressed how perfect all the dives went. Perfect. I mean, we would go for hours without ever touching bottom. But yet we're only a couple of meters off the bottom. And John was really good. John trimmed submarines. So when we're going down slope like this. And when we're going up slope like this. So I could always be close to the seabed. And John, he usually did a zero trim when we got 30 meters down to make sure that all the ballast tanks were balancing submarines, so it had no forward or stern trend down. And then when I asked for a down at the bow, he would pump water or pump some air out of the tanks forward and maybe do something with the stern. But he did it perfectly. We saw lots of objects on the way. Some of them, as I said, were pieces of wood. Some of them were piles of wood. We were, a meter or two high piled out there. As shown on the left there. A lot of this wood was cut wood. It was nice square edges, like boards would be cut. We saw several piles of wood in that area, which to us indicated there's something interesting nearby or underneath. When we knew that we're going to operate with the vehicles visually and the vehicles only, the best way was to set the card onto the bottom so she didn't drift somewhere we didn't want to go with any kind of current. So we would sit down in the mud, and of course, over time, she sank more and more into the mud, particularly since we had taken all the ballast out of the ballast tanks to be heavy to go downward. So after a while being in the mud, and we decided we had finished analyzing and looking and observing and videotaping and recording, we decided to lift off. And the captain pumped water out of the tanks to pump in air to make them light again, for us to lift off the bottom. And we didn't lift off the bottom, even when he had the tanks by this time full of air. We're all a little anxious at that point because we're sitting on the bottom and we're now moving. We're supposed to be moving up. So then John encouraged us to walk back and forth.
That's Captain Swan?
Yeah, we didn't have much distance to walk. We tried to rock the thing back and forth, which I think had some effect. It wasn't really noticeable inside, but had some effect. And then all of a sudden it came free and it went to the surface like a rocket.
Tell us about the wood this gentleman in the picture on the right is holding.
Yeah, that's John Cryer, one of the researchers, holding the piece of wood that got caught in the stern guard support around or at the propeller. It was the only place we know that we were real close to the bottom, in fact, into the mud, and the only place this could have come from. And we saw other pieces of wood on the ground through the viewports. So when we came to the surface and we tried to check the submarine, we found this piece of wood. And it not only was a rough-looking piece of wood, but it also had holes drilled in it. So it was obviously a piece of wood that was handled had been worked on.
Is this wood pile where the sonar saw that 140-foot ship?
Same area. This piece of wood was carbon dated and analyzed by a university and found to be the correct age for galleons of that era. And they were also the right type of wood of northern Spain, they said. The State Wave was a support vessel that also was used to tow the submarine There's a state wave, yeah. The Gulf Coast ships. This was more efficient for us because it was a quicker show.
And then what are we looking at here?
On the left, we're looking at the very back end or the stern of the card, and on top is the entry or exit hatch. And similarly, on the forward side, we have a hatch also for people to enter and leave. During the operation, the viewport was mostly used for looking up. I used to look up at about 170 meters, I remember. It was a sunny day. And I could see the wave action on the top reflecting, like the sun reflecting off the waves. That's how good the visibility was in the water. There's the captain on Swan and Mark Corner sitting, operating, or the logbook, actually entering into the logbook at that point. I would say most of the time we were 8 hours or more. We actually had one dive where we started to run out of, we had a whole bunch of sensors going off, warning us that we should be surfacing. We were there for, I think, close to 12 hours on that dive. We had some very interesting things to look at. Some of those we showed in the photos. Here is a picture of the captain and a Colombian officer on the right-hand side. We always had at least one officer on board, the August Picard, for observation of what we were doing, what we're seeing, and what we're hearing. There was also a Colombian officer on board the surface vessel doing the same thing. Here is the crew relaxing for some drinks and a meal, and we have two Colombian officers standing up. They were also taking part in the dives.
So they were always with you, and they were always aware of locations of where you were.
Yes, they were basically there to support of the Colombian government. They could look at anything in writing or in visual display.
So it was complete transparency to the Colombian government.
Exactly, that was the reason. The card here is back in Switzerland, in Lucerne, Switzerland, at the museum on exhibit. She's completely overhauled, shows all the viewports, at least on the left side, and the three viewports at the bow. One of the viewports is just barely showing, but it's there. So she's there ready now for visitors to come and see both the outside and the inside.
At what point did everything abruptly come to a halt?
I should point out that I wasn't there at that time. I had to go back once in a while to take care of my own business in Vancouver. I was away, and apparently during that particular time, or after they finished with that operation, they came back in toward Cartagena and were arrested. Was it right after, the sonar showed a 140-foot ship, you had the wood piles, you had the dated wood, you had, everything, and you had the coordinates as best as you could for 1980 technology for where all that was. And was it right after that this happened? Yes. Yes, definitely. That's where we were when they arrested, and in fact, that's why it didn't make any sense. And in fact, that was the end of the operation. It's unfortunate that the Colombian government shut us down by arresting the Picard, because if we had continued, we had been allowed to continue, I'm convinced that the outcome would have been much different. The whole crew was about to have absolute 100% success, and however, the Colombian government knew at that point that that's exactly what was going to happen. Yeah. And then arrested the crew. Right. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, Helmut, is there anything else you'd like to say? Our search operation was going well until the government of Colombia arrested the submarine and the crew. It is hard to say what would have happened if we had continued as stated in our agreement with the government of Colombia. It is my opinion that if we had continued, the outcome would have been quite different.
We will once again hear from Mr. Jack Harbiston. He will talk about his attempts to raise the galleon for the enjoyment of the Colombian people and indeed for the people around the world.
Litigation in the case of Sea Search Armada versus the government of Colombia has a unfortunately long and colorful history. We tried to negotiate a contract with the government in 1982 as soon as we had disclosed the location of the San Jose. Search Armada has been engaged in litigation with Colombia since 1989. We filed our first lawsuit there in Colombia in January of 1989 after several futile years of trying to reach a settlement with the government of Colombia. We had, in fact, reached a settlement with the government of Colombia, who reduced that settlement to writing in the form of a contract that allowed us to recover the ship that we had discovered as Colombia had originally promised us. The government of Colombia submitted to us, Sea Search Armada, for signature an agreement that allowed us to recover the San Jose in keeping with a plan that we would prepare. However, after we had signed that, reached an agreement with Colombia, and returned it to Colombia, that government then refused to do that. That was in 1984. We tried for 5 years to revive that, to have some settlement with Colombia, and failed. In November of 1988, I contacted Danilo Davis in Barranquilla, Colombia, and he prepared our first litigation, which was in civil court in Barranquilla. Before that suit had been resolved by the court, Danilo filed another suit in Constitution Court. After years of trying, in 1989, we reluctantly filed suit in Colombia Civil Court, suing the government of Colombia for our share. That led to about 30 years dilatory actions by the government of Colombia to simply delay, and the hope, I think, that they hoped that we would go away or die, or both. The civil court, following the decision by the Colombia Constitutional Court that what the government of Colombia had done was illegal, that they had passed a new law in 1984 and had applied that retroactively. Civil court in Barranquilla ruled with the Constitutional Court that this was an illegal act and that SSA was entitled to 50% of any treasure that surfaced from that ship, no matter who collected it. The Constitutional Court said that what the government of Colombia was doing at that very moment was unconstitutional. In other words, they were breaking the law. We have not, by the way, ever broken the law in Colombia or not complied fully with laws and regulations in Colombia. The government of Colombia did not accept that, and we ended up going through 19 years of litigation, ending in a ruling by the Supreme Court in July 2007 that was what the lawyers call res judicata, or it could not be changed by any court in any country.
Eso fue el origen del litigio. En el año 84 el gobierno redujo, después de descubierto el galeón y de denunciado, redujo del 50 al 5% de la participación de Sea Search Armada. Pero Sea Search Armada no solamente demandó ante la jurisdicción civil, también demandó ante la jurisdicción constitucional ese decreto y lo declararon inexequible, los artículos que hicieron la reducción. De manera que el litigio se ganó prácticamente en todas las jurisdicciones y en todas las instancias.
One would think that would be the end of it, that we had taken it all the way through the courts, but Colombia brought suit also in administrative court, and we spent several more years with that until finally there was nothing left in Colombian courts that could be done, and the government of Colombia refused to implement the rulings by the Supreme Court. Basically, that's where we are today. Danilo represented us also before the administrative court And all three of those venues, the Constitutional Court, the Civil Court, and the Administrative Court, the Court of Cundinamarca, were ruled in our favor. In every case, the court ruled that the government of Colombia was breaking the law. The guy that made that all possible, and for whom I have the greatest respect, is Danilo Davis. Any success of this venture can be attributed largely, if not entirely, to Danilo Davis. He has my greatest respect and appreciation. The promises that we were given were not kept. The rulings by the courts, the civil court, the administrative court, the constitutional court, up to and including the Supreme Court, were simply ignored by the government of Colombia. This is not the action of a civilized government, and we want to see some pressure brought to encourage the government to do the right thing and implement the laws that the court ruled on. Because the government of Colombia refused to implement the rulings of its own court and threatened us with interception by the Colombia military if we tried to, as the Colombian laws would allow, to go to our property to access. And they would not allow that by military force. So there was clearly the government of Colombia, the executive branch, did not see things the way the judicial branch. That left us pretty much high and dry until we decided reluctantly, again, to start litigating and to take the litigation to U.S. courts. Reason why SSA did not continue litigation in the United States is that the government of Colombia, in response to our continued request to sit down and negotiate a settlement, insisted that they would not discuss settlement with us until all litigation by SSA against the government of Colombia was withdrawn from all court. That included not only the United States District Court, but also the Organization of American States legal arm, the IACHR, the human rights. We reluctantly withdrew our cases, the District Court as well as the OAS, in order to have the meeting with the government of Colombia. But that was not, as it turned out, that was not a good faith offer by Colombia. What turned up later in the news was that while the government was pretending to negotiate a settlement with SSA, it was in fact already making a deal with a group called MAX, that stands for Maritime Archaeology Consultants Switzerland. While the government of Colombia was pretending to talk to us about prerequisites to settlement discussions, they had already signed a secret deal with MAX, and they were looking locations for the San Jose, beginning with the Sea Search Armada site. This is a matter of record. There was no settlement discussions, in fact. The negotiation with Max was done in great secrecy, and interestingly, it involved a former employee of Sea Search Armada, a man by the name of Roger Dooley, but also operating under several other aliases. He was also on the Clinton list, and we knew nothing of this when we hired him in 2000, the year to serve on a project we have in the Western Pacific to recover a Spanish colonial ship called the Santa Margarita. We did find that later that Dooley was involved. As we reconstructed it later, he had notes on his company computer, that is the computer that was loaned to him for the season, diving season by the government, by the Sea Search Armada, that he had notes there on the San Jose. So he was working while he was with us on another project on the San Jose, but we knew nothing about it. Further realized, to our dismay, that Dooley had access to all of the Government of Colombia records that Sea Search Armada had on its computer. That would be my computer, which was just about 5 steps from Roger Dooley's office. So he had access, he had motive, and as it turned out, he ended up with the group that claims to have found the San Jose. There is also an embargo on the ship and its contents by the judicial branch. And that embargo says that no matter who collects the treasure from the ship, that any and all artifacts have to be delivered to the National Bank in Cartagena, where it would be administered and secured not by the government of Colombia, not by the executive branch, but by a judge, by the judicial branch.
De cualquier manera, lo que salga de allí, sea quien lo rescate, está embargado a orden, es decir, dentro del proceso civil. De manera que cualquier discusión que haya ahora en el futuro tendría que hacerse ya con los objetos embargados y retenidos en el Banco de la República de Cartagena. Sentencia, pues, porque es el título de dominio por excelencia. No hay ningún título de dominio mejor que una sentencia de la Corte Suprema, porque es un título que es cosa juzgada. Y el embargo se hizo con la finalidad de garantizar el cumplimiento de la sentencia. Es decir, con ese embargo, Sea Search tiene la garantía de que el 50% de los tesoros le van a ser entregados. Esa es una situación irreversible y definitiva.
Now, clearly, this is a note of distrust by the judicial branch as to how fairly the government would operate. In December of 2015, the government of Colombia held a press conference in which it claimed to have found the San Jose, and that the San Jose was at a different location than Sea Search Armada had disclosed to the government of Colombia in 1982. That 1982 disclosure resulted in first a study, careful consideration by DIMAR, the government enforcement authority, and many of the DIMAR people that were studying it were monitors or observers, Sea Search Armada ship, including a submarine. And so they saw with their own eyes that SSA had found the ship at a location where the San Jose was sunk. That position led to a claim by the government of Colombia much later that the DIMAR decree recognizing that we in fact had the San Jose, that decree did not take into account that the location given by Sea Search Armada was not a precise location. The government of Colombia, solely for the purpose of disenfranchising Sea Search Armada, claimed that the location provided by Sea Search Armada was not sufficiently accurate. Now, to make that statement, they used the global positioning system, the GPS, which is precise, but was not available to us in 1982 when we informed them of that. They did not. The global positioning system wasn't introduced to the public until 1984. So the attempt by the government of Colombia to disenfranchise SSA by claiming it was inaccurate just doesn't hold water. The announcement or the disclosure by SSA to the government of Colombia, upon which we were given a decree, an official written decree saying that we had found this ship. The disclosure by SSA was not for a precise location, but for a debris field that was around the coordinates given. So we could not give one precise coordinate and accurately describe what we had found. We had found a debris field, and we do not know, even because Colombia won't let us go back there with an expedition, we do not know the size or shape of the debris field. And these debris fields can be, in the case of the Atocha, which was discovered off the coast of Colombia by Mel Fisher, the debris field is now over 10 miles long and continuing. And we can cite many other cases of natural movement of those targets like that. For example, the Titanic, where it sank, the bow was found several miles, like 5 miles from where the stern was found. So what we have in the San Jose is a debris field. The ship exploded. We don't know how much of the ship was lost in the explosion or how far it went, but it's not unusual in such explosions, especially one involving the whole powder magazine going up. They could have blown pieces of that ship for 5 miles. So the fact is that we found a debris field. We did our best to accurately describe it, and I think we did accurately describe it. Debris surrounding coordinates that we estimated prior to GPS. We can't get any more accurate than that. If we tried to say it was a precise location, it would simply not be true, and then we could really be disenfranchised by misrepresenting. We are now seriously considering it again, or talking to 2 law firms, one in Washington, D.C. and one in New York. And the one in Washington, D.C. specializes, all they do are litigation against foreign sovereign nations. We can still sue the government of Colombia in the United States. That door is still open. The Supreme Court of Colombia has ruled res judicata that we own 50% of that ship, no matter who collects it.
Es imposible una solución de este asunto sin que participe Sea Search, o mejor, sin que participe la sentencia de la Corte Suprema que declaró a Sea Search titular del dominio del 50% de los tesoros.
In closing, I would like to address the subject of recovery of the San Jose. How and by whom would do it, and who would get the treasure, which at this point is dedicated 50% to SSA and 50% to the government of Colombia. Clearly, that is negotiable. Phil Davis's consistent record of victories in court were modified before he died 1 year ago, was eventually to recognize that the San Jose, whoever recovers it, should remain entirely in Colombia. However, under the law of eminent domain, SSA is supposed, as 50% owner, is to receive fair market value or some settlement for its share of the ship. Danilo convinced me before he died that it was the right thing to do. And I agree with that. That, I think, is Danilo Davis's final full and faithful gift to the people of Colombia. We respect him and we respect that decision. Sea Search Armada investors are inclined to keep the ship all together. We have no objection to that, and we in fact support Francisco Munoz and others in his group who want to keep the ship together. Our position is that if that's what Colombia wants, that's fine. We're not hell-bent on owning gold. But we do believe that the Colombia court decision should be upheld, and we are entitled to something under eminent domain. If the government of Colombia wants to just step in and take the ship, they can do that legally. We recognize that. We also recognize that we're supposed to be receiving something, especially after being forced to litigate for 30 years after that. We have not been treated well. It's time to close this chapter, settle out, and get on with recovering the San Jose. We went so far at one point as to estimate as best we could different means recovering the ship. And there are several options available, but one can't select an option knowing as little as we do about the site. We have been trying to get back to send an expedition to that site for years. We have brought this up to practically every president of Colombia for the last 8 presidents. And they don't even answer. If they do answer, it's to threaten us with intercepting our expedition with armed force. But now then it's time to get on with it, to get the ship collected, and to settle with Sea Search Armada.
Again, my name is Mark Wren. Since my wife, Kathleen Harbiston Wren, and I conducted the interviews for Sea Search Armada's presentation, we will be happy to answer questions.
Hello, my name is Kathleen Harbiston Wren. I am Jack Harbiston's daughter, and it is a privilege today to represent my father as well as speak for Sea Search Armada in answering the questions that were received regarding the content of the videos that you were shown today. The first question regards Mike Donovan's observation of a ship collapsed in upon itself. And the question is whether or not Mike believes that what he saw was the main target, which was estimated at about 140 feet long. And the answer to the question is yes, that is Mike's belief. The second question regards Mike Donovan's observation of 23 targets. And the question itself is whether or not the government of Colombia was made aware of these 23 targets and if information was provided to the Colombian government, such as coordinates for the 23 targets. The answer is that the government of Colombia had crew on board the ship and on board the submarine at all times. They worked arm in arm with Sea Search Armada crew. They had full transparency and full disclosure to every activity that occurred on both the submarine and the ship. So yes, the government of Colombia had awareness.
And it should be pointed out that Sea Search Armada's findings, DMAR's declarations in the Colombian Supreme Court findings were not for a specific target, but for a location and the surrounding debris field of the disclosed coordinates. Sea Search Armada's recollection is that that sonar images were provided for all these findings.
Next question. Was the analysis that was performed on the wood samples, as mentioned by Roy Doty, provided to the government of Colombia? The answer is yes. The analysis was filed with the government of Colombia.
With regard to the location of cannons found, mentioned by Roy Doty, the archaeological site of the San Jose includes the disclosed location and the surrounding debris field. Many cannons, multiple cannons, were found in the San Jose archaeological site. With regard to the letters CM credentials following Mr. Lanziner's name, the designation of CM following Mr. Lanziner's name shows that he is a member of the Order of Canada. Mr. Lanziner's membership to this exclusive order is in recognition of his major lifetime contribution to electronic charts that are used around the world today. With regard to does the reported finding in 2015 correspond with SSA's disclosure in 1982? Sea Search Armada believes that the finding reported in 2015 is within the same debris field and within the same archaeological site of the San Jose as disclosed by Sea Search Armada in 1982. Unfortunately, based on the published pictures of this 2015 so-called finding, it is obvious that the archaeological site has been violated and is no longer intact. Since completely bare cannons and other items are exposed with no silt covering in the published pictures, with nothing else in the area, nothing else is exposed like that, it is impossible to know what has been pillaged and to what extent the archaeological site has been damaged. With regard to the investment the Sea Search Armada has in the recovery, search for and recovery of the San Jose, it's been almost 40 years. The managers of Sea Search Armada and its attorneys, the hours have been countless over a 40-year period, as well as many other members of the Sea Search Armada team. In addition to the millions of dollars spent on the submarines and other vessels and equipment, the exact amount of the Sea Search Armada investment is impossible to calculate. Needless to say, over these 40 years, the investment is significant, hundreds of millions of dollars. Additionally, considering the government of Colombia's refusal to honor the Supreme Court's ruling since 2007, punitive damages are appropriate to consider.
Next question. Do the many hours of video that Captain Swan says were taken of the main 140-foot target exist today? Answer. SSA provided the government of Colombia full transparency and disclosure to the search activities and documents. As Captain Swan stated, many trips were made back to the target site, and the Colombian government personnel observed all activities, including video recordings. Next question regarding detailed information about the San Jose that Sea Search Armada may have. The answer is, with regard to the length of the main target, one of the ways that length was determined was with the use of the side scan sonar. SSA's underwater detection expert, Mr. Helmut Lanzinger, states the acoustic shadow was measured and estimated at roughly 140 feet.
With regard to the magnetometer graph, Sea Search Armada's underwater expert, again, Mr. Helmut Lanzinger, states the graph of the magnetometer that is shown was taken while the submarine was passing over the wreck. So as the submarine was making a pass over top of the wreck, the magnetometer readings were taken. Further states, the shape of the graph indicates a large amount of iron, possibly cannonballs and cannons. Based on all submissions by Sea Search Armada, including this magnetometer graph, DMAR and the Colombian Supreme Court concluded Sea Search Armada had found the San Jose.